My name is Bill Hurd, and I'm moderator and interviewer for the Wilkes Oral History Project. Today is Friday. It is the 10th of August, and it's our great pleasure to have with us for this 30-minute interview Reverend Montreal, just like the city.
That's right.
Montreal Howell. Reverend Howell, thank you very much for being with us. You were born in Wilkes County.
Yes.
Just a few years ago.
Yes, just a few.
Tell us what part of the county you were born in, and a little bit about your growing up with brothers and sisters, I understand.
Yes, I was born in the, I call it the upper part of Wilkes County, right next to Caldwell County, a place they call Boomer. And I grew up out of a large family, and I have 18 full brothers and sisters and 4 half. And so for that reason then, we're 17. My father was father of 22 children, married twice. And he was a preacher, Methodist preacher, and I grew up in church. I had to go to church, but in those days we went to church in wagon. We didn't have cars, we went to church in wagon. And in 1927, I was going to the old Thankful School that was right near Thankful Church there in Boomer. And my cousin was teacher, and she bought a new 1927 Ford. And this old car, it had isinglass windows in it instead of glass windows, had isinglass curtains. And had a little hole to put your hand out to make your signal. Didn't have turn signals, but I told some of them after I grew up that when John Glenn walked on the moon, he didn't do no more than I did when I got my first ride. All dirt roads, there was no blacktop roads. In my early childhood, going from Wilkesboro to Lenore, Taylorsville was all dirt roads. And you come to a creek. There's not many bridges back then. You just ford the creek, drive through it, and go on. Wagon, car, whatnot, just go on, just go through it.
From Wilkesboro to Lenore, how long would it take you to get there?
Well, I'm not sure, but just take by wagon and the early automobiles, it's quite a task. In other words, if you had to go by wagon or the early automobiles, you just might be able to take about a day to make the round trip if you had any business much in the city.
So growing up, you didn't travel real far from home. Where you were was pretty well where you stayed because it was so hard to get anywhere else.
That's right, that's true.
So everything that you had was close to your house.
It was close to the house.
The community had to be close.
That's right. And, well, everything was right there. You know, I talked to my wife this morning, and I said, I listen to people talk about my breakfast and where I got my breakfast, but I'm sorry, but they really don't know. When we were growing up, if we were all eating steak or pork chops or whatnot, we could see it come from one cow or one calf if it was veal. But now then, the family might sit down to the table and be 5 people at the table, all of them be eating from a different calf. Mm-hmm. But we knew what was eaten in those days. When we had a biscuit, I raised wheat, cut the wheat with a cradle. I done that myself. And then we'd stack the wheat. I learned how to stack wheat at an early age. And we stacked the wheat, and then the thrashers would come through with a thrashing machine and thrash the wheat out. We'd put all the wheat from one field in a pile, and then when it dried, we'd take it to what we call the roller mill and get flour made out of it. Well, we was all eating biscuits out of the same field. But now then, your biscuit might come from a variety of fields because they bring all the wheat into the granary and dry it there, and then it's divided up and sifted from the many different farms, and you really don't know how many fields your biscuit come out of.
What you're saying makes me think of some things.
Uh-huh.
So let me express a few thoughts to you, and then you can respond to me.
Right.
You knew exactly where you were, who you were,
Right.
and what it took to live.
Right.
You had strong roots into the earth.
Right.
Family.
Right.
That's not the way it is today.
No, it's not.
Was that a better time? When you grew up, because you had all of these roots and you had this affinity for the place and what you were doing?
Right. Well, I see it's kind of like when you look back over time and see, you say a lot of time we had better days back then. In one way, it was better. And then in another day, you don't want to go back there, but you wish we had some of the qualities was put into life back in that day that's not here now. We've lost a lot of quality in life that one time was in there, but it's come out what we say is better day. It's more of a fast time now than it was then, but we've lost a lot of quality of life that we had back then that we don't have now.
Talk to me a little bit about those qualities.
All right.
It's very important.
Some of the main qualities was back then, we had some security, a little more than money to depend on. We had 2 hogs in the pen. We had 2 or 3 milk cows. Didn't have any pastures. We had stakes to stake them out. And there was a quality there that the youth of that day, they had some chores around the house that more than looking at television, they knew we had some chores tonight. We knew that before the sun went down, we had to have our night's wood cut, put on the porch, box behind the stove filled up with wood to cook breakfast. The old water reservoir on the stove, we had to go to the spring and carry water to put in that reservoir on the stove so we'd have warm water to take the baths with and whatnot. And this gave the children a sense of security or a sense of responsibility that I'm afraid that we've lost a lot of that. So I would say that, yes, there was some better things back there in quality, although there's some more easier times now. But the quality, we've lost a lot of quality.
Good, thank you. Talk about your growing up and when you went to school and when you had to leave school.
Okay, when I grew up going to school, I first went to Thankful School, 2-room school building with what we call pot-bellied schools in the floor. And at that time, my sisters and I and my older brother, he's 5 years older than I was, we were walking to school, and we had, I'd say, at least 4 miles to walk. We didn't have overshoes, we didn't have umbrellas, and the school didn't shut down in those days because of a rainy time or because of a snow. Well, not the school still went on. And we would walk this distance to school. When we got there, a lot of times our shoes would be wet, our clothes would be wet, and we'd have a good fire in the stove, we'd pull our coats off and hang them on a chair around the stove and let them dry. And then put them back on. We were just happy with that. Well, our school, in my last part of time that I was at Thankful School, I was a 2-room school building, but it didn't have a porch to it. It just had 2 doors to enter the school. Our teacher, he said, I'm going to teach you boys how to make boards to cover a building. We're going to put a porch to this school. And he got there and he got a log, a forked log, and cut it down in about a 8-foot length, but it was forked close together. And he said, this is a frog. And then he got what looked like a mowing size, turned backwards, a little short handle to it. Now this is a fro. And then he took a wooden maul hewed out of a small hickory tree with a handle to it and said, this is a maul. And I'm going to show you how to make boards to cover this building. He cut down a red oak and cut it in about 2.5-foot lengths and split it off, and then he'd set those pieces split off, he'd set it in this frog. And we'd take the fro and sit down and hit it with a maul at, say, about 3/4 of an inch thick. And the grain was so straight in that red oak, when you hit down and then prised over in that frog to hold it, when you prised over with your fro, it bust this shingle off. And then you had a shingle there to cover the building with. So we covered that porch with those old
red oak shingles.
with those shingles that we made. That was quite an experience for me. The teacher saw to it that we get some experience that we could live with in life. So then if I had to cover my house today and there wasn't else, I know how to make shingles to cover.
Now, later on in your schooling, you had to quit school.
Yes, it is.
Some of your brothers and sisters to continue to go to school.
That's right. With a relocation, at that time I got to be, well, I was about 13 years old. I tried, through 12 or 13, I tried at Lincoln Heights for part of 2 years. And I couldn't make the grade because I couldn't put in enough time. But I was working on a farm, and first job I had on a farm was, I was only 10 years old, first job that I had, and I was only making 3 cents an hour. But there'd come days, especially on Saturday, I'd work 8 and 9 hours for 3 cents an hour. And then the sad part about it, at that particular time, I couldn't get all the money for the 3 cents an hour. This man run a store, and he'd say, I'll pay you so much money, you take so much out of the store. So I'd buy so much stuff. That learned me some responsibility, that I had a responsibility back at home. On one time, I remember I was working, and I did some extra work at cutting wood, fire stick lamps, and we'd split the wood and load it on a truck and haul it to Westbury and sell it, working for a man that run a wood yard. And it was cold, and times was hard back then. And I paid 25 cents for a pair of gloves. My hands are cold. Well, I carried the new gloves home, and my mother looked at them and said, yeah. I said, but, said, we don't have food, and said, I wish that you bought something else with that instead of gloves. Well, I just dropped my head. I didn't say a word. So next morning, I took the gloves back to the store. And I got that quarter back and carried it, give it back to my mother. And these are some of the things that you learn responsibility from as you grow up.
Now, people who are looking at this video now will say, gosh, a quarter, that's not a lot of money. What could you buy with a quarter? So think back what 25 cents that your mom then had for, what would that have bought back in the time you're talking about?
Well, 25 cents, you could have bought, you see, everything was loose back then. You didn't, it was not bagged up like it was. You could have bought a scoop of sugar. You could have bought a cut of fat back. And then possibly you could have got a box of soda, all for a quarter. Mm-hmm. And you think of what one thing would cost you now.
Yeah. And you're talking about stuff that you'd buy from the store that you didn't have at your house.
That's right.
You'd have wheat flour.
That's right.
And you'd have meat.
That's right.
So you're talking about the things to go along with that.
That's right.
The sugar, the fat back, those things that you couldn't produce on your own.
That's right. Yes, sir. You could buy, let's say for instance, you wanted to buy a pair of socks, you get a pair of socks for 10 cents. And, well, if you wanted to mail a letter, you could mail it for 3 cents. And if you wanted to buy, I never did smoke for that reason, but if you wanted to buy a bag of Prince Albert tobacco, a little bag, and roll your own, you could get it probably for 10 or 15 cents. So these are some of the things that's been a great change in.
You did not get your high school diploma for a long time.
No.
You worked many years before you had the chance to go back and get your high school
That's
diploma.
right.
What types, we'll get to that story in just a minute. So
Okay.
before I ask you that, what types of employment did you go through?
All right. Well, mostly after I quit school, the first job I had, I worked at a rock quarry. I was just 15 years old. And I worked at a rock quarry with men. And I mean, we had these heavy hammers, and we would load them rock in those skips to grind up, haul them to the crusher and crush the rock. And that was